Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf ayin hey. Today's daf is dedicated to the safety of our soldiers and our country. The registration for the Shiur is up. As I mentioned, Racheli Sprecher-Frankel will be teaching about resilience. And it's a Shiur, just to remind you, not only on Kiddushin, but also on all of Seder Nashim. We're going to celebrate in a bit of a different manner, just a bit of a different tone of the Shiur because of the situation that we're in. But it still is a reason for celebration. We hope you all join. It'll be on Zoom on Sunday, November 5th. Just a reminder that on Friday in the morning on Zoom, I will teach the first daf of Baba Kama, which is really the Shabbat daf. So that'll be your daf for Shabbat. Sunday, we'll continue Baba Kama as usual. And then in the evening, Israel time, wherever you are, your time will be the Shiur. And then we'll finish the Shiur just 2 days later so that, Friday is not exactly a great day to do a Shiur internationally. Okay, that's for the Shiur. If anybody wants to join the Hebrew, it'll be Thursday night. So if you really want to get to it on time, you can do it then. The program will be very similar. The community speakers will be different, but Racheli will be speaking there as well. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. We have a bit of a complicated daf. The study guide should help organize. There's a lot of charts which help kind of visualize what's going on here. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. So we're starting at Ayin Dalet Amud at the bottom of the daf. Tanu Rabbanan. Ben Tesha Shanim v'Yom Echad. Okay, that already tells us what are we talking about here? We're talking about someone who is capable of having sexual relations, whereas a boy, it's 9 years and a day. So if a man or boy at anywhere above the age of 9 and a day, it could be 9, it could be 15, it could be 30, whatever it is. If any of these people who are a man who is a ger amoni umavi, which again, these are all people who can't get married into the community. So an ger amoni umavi, a mitzri adomi, also they can't marry within, right? The Egyptian and Edomite, only the 3rd generation can, but a 1st or 2nd generation, or a cuti. We're going to talk about the kutim later today. A natin, okay, the kutim are the shomronim. Remember when the Assyrians came and they took the Israelite kingdom, they exiled it. So they brought people in to live in Israel who weren't Jewish, and then these animals came, lions came and attacked them, and then they found a kohen to teach them the laws, and they became Jewish, but there's a big machloket. Are they real Jews or are they not real Jews? And we're going to start today talking about them toward the middle of today's daf and continue the discussion into tomorrow. Next, we have the natin, right, which are the people from the time of Yoshua, the Givonim. The halal. Now, he's the only one who's a bit of an exception. A halal is actually allowed to marry. That's a kohen who's born to a problematic kohen marriage between his parents. Now, he actually is allowed to marry anyone he wants. Okay, right. His only problem is, depending on the opinion you have, whether his children are halalim or he can't work in the temple. But he's actually allowed to marry a regular woman. So this is the only real exception to the rule where it's not actually a problem here. So we basically have him having all these people having relations with a random Jewish woman. Okay, mamzer, that's our last on our list. Sheba'u ala kohenet al leviya v'bat Yisrael. Any of them engage in sexual relations with a regular woman. Okay, so they're all people who are disqualified, or the halal is that one exception, which is that the halal is really, right, there's only an issue with a halal as pertains to kihuna, so he can't work in the temple. But if he has a relationship with a woman, psalua, any woman who had a relationship with any of these people can no longer marry a kohen. Okay, she's disqualified from marrying a kohen. Whether they married them, whether they didn't marry them, it doesn't make a difference. Okay, if they had a sexual encounter with them, disqualified. That woman can't marry a kohen. Now we're going to have 2 other opinions about this, which are going to be very unclear how they disagree. And the next part of the Gemara is going to figure out, well, what's the difference between these 3 opinions. Rabbi Eliezer, if their children are messed up, meaning they have problematic lineage, then the woman, in other words, you have this woman who has relations with some man, okay, one of these people on the list, if their children will be disqualified. For example, a woman has a relationship with a mamzer, the child will be a mamzer no matter what. If that's the case, then she can't marry a kohen. So if by having this relationship, the child that would have come, whether she has a child, doesn't have a child, would have been disqualified, that disqualifies her. But if the child wouldn't be disqualified, we're going to have to figure out which one on this list is he referring to from the previous list, then she's not disqualified herself. She's only be disqualified for marrying a kohen if her child would have been disqualified. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, kol shat, which basically means if it's the way we would call it nowadays, a genetic problem, right? Where basically it's going down to her disqualification is going down to she's causing a problem with the children that would have been born, then that messes her up for marrying a kohen. But if not, then not. So now the third opinion, also not clear what he means. If you can marry his daughter, then you can marry his widow. Again, this means the exact same thing about if you marry the daughter, which means meaning if a kohen can marry the daughter, which means that the zera, again, it's the same thing as Rabbi Yossi. If the children are not problematic, right, then she's not problematic. Then you can marry his almanah. That means if she were to marry one of these characters and the daughter would have been okay, then she can marry. And if you can't marry, if a kohen can't marry the daughter of this relationship, then he also can't marry the widow, meaning whether she's a widow or whether she just engaged in a sexual encounter. What's the difference? Well, it sounds one saying zera, which seems to include male and female, and here it's saying only female. So we're going to have to get to what all the differences are. So right now, if you didn't understand anything, don't worry, neither did the Gemara, and the Gemara is now going to explain. What's the difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi? It's a mitzri sheni. What's with the mitzri sheni? A woman is not allowed to marry a second generation Egyptian convert or Edomite for all intents and purposes. But if she does, their child is a third generation, and a third generation can already marry within the community. So that would be the difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. Now, we're going to see this as we go on. Rabbi Yossi is more lenient than Tanakama, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is more lenient than Rabbi Yossi. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi is basically saying, I'm taking Mitzri Sheni off your list. Mitzri Sheni and Edomi Sheni. Okay? Let's read it inside. Both of them learn it Elami Kohen Gadol Ba'almana. They both actually learn it from the same place. Did Tanakama Saval Ki Kohen Gadol Ba'almana? Tanakama holds it's just like a Kohen Gadol and Almana. Again, they're both going to learn it from this. A Kohen Gadol can't marry a widow. Okay, now what happens if a Kohen Gadol mates with a widow? Okay, whether they again have sexual relations outside of marriage or inside of marriage, it creates that she is disqualified now to marry a regular Kohen, even though she's just a widow. Let's say she marries Kohen Gadol dies, she becomes, if you remember, this is how halalim work. Not only does the child become a halal, but also she becomes a halalah. She's now called a halalah, and a halalah means you can't marry a Kohen. So, ma Kohen Gadol ba'almana. So comes Tanakama and says, listen, let's look at the rules there. What happens there? Will be a tova vera uposel. She becomes disqualified. Why? Because she was forbidden to have a relationship with the Kohen Gadol. Just the forbidden relationship is what forbids her. So therefore, any one of the people on this list who is a forbidden marriage, again, the only unique exception is the halal, because it's not forbidden for a halal to be with a regular woman, right? It's not a problem at all. It's just a halalah can't be with a kohen. But we're going to leave that one aside. That's just because a halal who mates, basically, it kind of creates that she's going to be a halalah as well. But basically, we're going to say, so since Kohen Gadol Ba'almana, what was the main problem? They couldn't marry each other. So therefore, anyone who can't marry, of course, should be a tova vera posel. So for example, the Mitzri Sheni can't marry this woman. If he mates with her, then she can't marry a Kohen, even though the child, well, that wasn't the issue with the Kohen Gadol and the Almanah. The issue was that she was forbidden to be with him. That's the main thing. Rabbi Yossi Safari says, what are you talking about? Ki Kohen Gadol Ba'almana. Has to be exactly like Kohen Gadol Ba'almana. You're ignoring one important element. What happens with Kohen Gadol Ba'almana? Ma Kohen Gadol Ba'almana, as I said before, Zar'o pasul uposel. A Kohen Gadol Ba'almana, she becomes a halalah because she did something wrong, but also the children become disqualified. The children become halalim. Remember, it says there, v'lo yichalel zar'o, right? That the zera, you can't do this because you're going to mess up your children. So it has to be exactly like Kohen Gadol Ba'almana. You just focused it on one element, on the fact that she did something wrong and was in an improper relationship. But it also has to be that it's completely like it, which is the child will become disqualified. So av kol shezaro pasul posel lafuki mitzri sheni shein zaro pasul. But a mitzri sheni is not like a Kohen Gadol Ba'almana because the child is actually entirely permitted to marry anybody they want. How do we know this? Well, this we know already. Damar Krak, as the pasuk says, "Banim asher yivadu lahem dor shlishi yavolem b'kal Hashem." Right, sons that are born, the third generation will be able to come into the community. Okay, so that's how we have Rabbi Yossi and Tanakama. That's their main difference. Now we come to Rashbag. So Rashbag Omer, we're going to read it again. And I'm going to point out something in Rashbag that we're going to focus on later, but I'll point it out right now. Rashbag says, if you can marry his daughter, then you can marry his widow, meaning, right, whatever relationship she had, if the daughter's permitted, then the woman herself, the mother, or who could have been the mother of this daughter, whether she was or not, doesn't matter, but she's now permitted still to marry a kohen. Now, the second part is totally unnecessary. Because now, if you can't marry the daughter from this connection of people, then you can't marry the woman either. Okay, then the woman's disqualified. Now, that was obvious from the first part, so the second line is really unnecessary. But that's not what we're going to focus on right now. Now the Gemara is going to say the obvious, which is Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yossi leRashbag. So what's the difference between the two of them? Amar Ula. Ula explains, because both of them seem to say it has to do with the children. If the children are disqualified, the mother's disqualified. If not, the mother's okay to marry a kohen. Ula says, Ger Amoni Moavi Ika ben Hayi. Now remember Amoni Moavi, right? This is all about Ruth HaMoaviyah. How could she have married within the Jewish people? Well, the reason is because they darshan Amoni v'lo Amoni, Moavi v'lo Moavi. Said it in the masculine, right? Now, many times things are in the masculine in Hebrew and they mean also feminine. But in this case, they said, no, it's just the male, not the female. And therefore what? If a woman has a relationship with a ger Amoni or Edomite, a ger Amoni or Moavi, then what happens? Only if the daughter is going to be disqualified. In this case, the daughter is not disqualified. The daughter is the daughter of a ger Amoni or Moavi, which doesn't matter. She's totally fine. She's an Ammonit or Moavit, which is actually permitted. So he removes, Rabbi Yossi removed the ger Edomi Mitzri. Rabbi Rashbag gets rid of not only the ger Mitzri ve'Edomi, whose all children are going to be permitted, but the Ammoni Moavi also are off the list because their daughters are not disqualified. So now he says the following. So ger Ammoni Moavi ikabenayu, and again, shneim lo lamdu elami kohen gadol b'almana. How so? Or Rabbi Yossi, it's going to be a repeat of what we saw before. Rabbi Yossi savar ki kohen gadol b'almana has to be just like a kohen gadol b'almana. Ma kohen gadol b'almana shezaro pasul posel, of course shezaro pasul posel. Again, almana and kohen gadol makes chalalim, so therefore anyone who disqualifies the children will be disqualified. Rashbag says ki kohen gadol b'almana. Wait, it has to be really like it, fully like a kohen gadol b'almana. Ma kohen gadol b'almana shekol zaro pasul. Now kohen gadol b'almana gives birth to a boy, will be a halal. Gives birth to a girl, halala. So whether it's a male, whether it's female, they're disqualified. Therefore, anything that shekol zaro pasul, it would have to be that both your males and female children are going to be disqualified for it to be similar. Afilu nekevot, even girls. And that is laku ke ger Ammoni Moavit, and nekevot habu kshirot labo b'kahal, da amar Ammoni v'lo Ammonit, Moavi v'lo Moavit. So this is to exclude, which we already knew, right? It's to exclude the ger Ammoni Moavit, as the females, right? The drasha is Ammoni and not Ammoni, Moavi v'lo Moavi. It's males and not females. So it would have to be exactly like the Kohen Gadol. So each one basically comes to exclude more people from this issue. So each one is more lenient than the previous. So Tanakama includes any forbidden relationship. As long as it was a forbidden relationship, it's a problem. The next one, again, the halal is a bit different than the rest, but is in this list anyway. Then we get rid of the ger Mitzri and Edomi because they're the second generation of them, because their children will be okay, and therefore she's okay to marry a kohen. And the third opinion comes to exclude even the ger Ammoni and Ammonit and Moavi. She has a relationship with a convert who's Ammoni from Ammon or Moav. Basically, since the daughters will be okay, then that makes her okay as well. Now, comes Rav Chisda. The last part of the sugya is that Rav Chisda says, by the way, hakol mudim be'almanat isa shepsula l'kuna. Remember this word isa? Isa means doe. What's a widow doe? What does that mean? Well, isa, remember we said isa is all mixed up. And what happens when you have a dough? A dough is made up of all sorts of ingredients, but you can't figure out what ingredients are in the dough, right? Unless you have the recipe, you have no idea what's in there. So that's what an almanat isa is. It's a woman who we don't know who she was. We don't know the status of the person she was married to. Now, what's the issue? Well, she would have to be an almanah, not a gusha, because we want to know because she married a kohen. So it would have to be their husband had died. What's the status that's unclear of her husband? So the commentaries say the husband is what we call a safek halal. Okay, meaning We're not sure if he's a halal or not. Now, why would that be? Well, if you remember in Gittin, we had all sorts of cases where the woman is safek megureshet. A woman could be, right, divorced by unclear, right? Let's say he threw her the get and it wasn't clear if it fell close to him, close to her. And then let's say he dies. So either she's a widow or she's a divorcee. We don't know which one because we're not sure if she actually received the get. So if we have this woman who's perhaps divorced, perhaps not, and she marries a kohen and they have a child, that child is a safek, whether they're a halal or not. So now we have this woman who comes and has a relationship with this safek halal. Okay, so that's what Rav Chisda says. Hakol Modim, he says, all three people we saw, Tanakama, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, they all agree, if we're not sure if the guy she was with was really a halal or not, he's a safek halal, she's still going to be forbidden lakuna. How do we know this? Well, he gives this certain logic. He says, all I have to do is prove Rashbag agrees with this, because as I said, there was a progression here. Tanakama included the most people, Rabbi Yossi a little bit less, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel even less. So he was the most lenient. He said, right, we don't include the Ger Adomi and Mitzri Dor Sheni, and we don't include the second generation, and we don't include the Ger Amoni Moavi. So who's Man Meka B'Hanitznai? Who's the most lenient of all of them? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. And notice what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says. And now we get to the second line of what he said, which was totally unnecessary to say. Vika Amar, and he said, Kol shatanu sebito, tanu selmanuto. That's fine, okay. If you can marry his daughter, you can marry his wife, which means obviously if you can't marry his daughter, you can't marry his wife. So then the second line, if you can't marry his daughter, you can't marry his wife, that must be coming to say there's another case that you might not have thought of, which is also he can't marry her, okay? So what must be that case? If not, he assumes that extra sentence was there to include some other case we didn't think of. What case must be that? Where she was betrothed, where she was had relations with someone who was perhaps a halal, but not necessarily. And the statement of Rav Chisda, who says all of them agree, which means there's no machloket about this issue, is la'akbuke. Why did he have to stress this? Because he wanted to tell you, I don't agree with the following Tanaitic position. What is that? Ditnan he'i Rabbi Yeshua Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera almanat isa shekshera lekehuna. Okay, so this is Masechet Eduyot, where we have all sorts of testimonials of rabbis about certain halachot that were ruled, certain rulings there were. Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera come and say, almanat isa kshera lekehuna. If it's only a safek whether he was a halal or not, then she's allowed to marry a kohen. My timer, have sfek sveka lekula. The reason is it's a sfek sveka. So before we even get to this reason of sfek sveka, I just want to make it clear. So Rav Chisda disagreed with these two Tanaim. He said, no, look, all the Tanaim that we discussed all hold Almanat Isa is disqualified. And that's because he proved Rashbag held it. Again, it wasn't a clear proof, but he just said Rashbag added this extra line. It must be to include that case. And because what else would it be including? And if he agrees, then obviously all the other guys agree with him because he was the most lenient. So if he's going to be strict about that, it must be the other guys who agree with him as well. Which is to say, it wasn't ruled like these two Tanaim and Eduyot, which is interesting because usually we say Eduyot is the best Masechet, and it's got, right, we've seen it, B'Bechirta, Tanya B'Bechirta Kabateh, because it says it in the Bechirta, which is the chosen Masechet. Usually we hold that way, but he's coming to say we don't hold that way. Okay, and he was trying to knock out that approach. Now we have to explain what this sfek sveka. What is a sfek sveka? A sfek sveka is usually there's a double doubt. There's a doubt. Is this that, right? Is this right? And then after that, there's another doubt. So once you have a double safek, we usually say we're lenient. This case, there's actually only one doubt, okay? It's weird they call it a sfek sveka because what's the doubt? The doubt is, was the woman a divorcee? Which is really the doubt is the man a halal, right? So the doubt is about the status of this man. Is he a halal or not? And then the question is, right, when she had relations with him, does that disqualify her from being a kohen? So what's the sfek sveka? Okay, and then sfek sveka lekula. So Rashi says, okay, again, it's definitely not the use generally of a sfek sveka, and that's what Rashi has to explain. Ba'ala haya safek v'hi ba mikocholi pasel. The husband is a safek. Now, what's her? Well, she then had relations with the safek. It's like there's one safek, and then it's once removed. It's kind of like saying second cousins once removed. Okay, meaning you're of a different generation. She's detached, and the question is about her. But the root of the problem is with him, which actually is even with his mother. So there's something a little bit indirect about the safek, and therefore we're going to rule leniently. That's what those two rabbis held. Again, you could argue with that, which is exactly why Rav Chisda argues with it, because he doesn't think this is a sfek sveka. Okay, that was the first section of today's daf, which was to understand this Braita with the three different opinions about what relationships disqualify a woman if she engaging in sexual relations with a man. Has to be above 9 years in a day. Obviously, she has to be above 3 in a day. Otherwise, it wouldn't be relevant. And this will disqualify her from being able to marry a kohen. Okay, and then we had a three-way debate. We had to understand what the three-way debate is all about. And then we had the statement of Rav Chisda that said, by the way, they all agree that if it's a suffix about the woman, whether she was with a halal or not, well, that's going to disqualify her as well against these other Tanaim who thought not. Now we're going to move on to the second section. We have three sections of today's daf. Now we're going back to the Mishna. The Mishna talked about Rabbi Eliezer. Until now, we tried to explain the Mishnah. We had all different explanations. Yesterday, 4 different ways of understanding the Mishnah. Really, only the last one was the accepted one about what the machloka between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda is. But the last opinion there was Rabbi Eliezer Omer, which later we're going to see was probably Rabbi Elazar even. Vada'am b'vada'am mutar. I'm back in the Mishnah. Vada'am b'sfekan u'sfekan b'vada'am u'sfekan b'sfekan asu. Basically, what he means is, and then we said, what are the sfekot, shtuki, asufi, and cuti. So now we're going to get back to the cuti later, but basically we have this case where we have anyone, the only people who can marry each other, different from what we learned earlier, is a definite pasul with a definite pasul, like a mamzer and a mamzer and a natin, or something like that. But if it's a shtuki, a sufi, or kuti, where we're not sure what their status is, they actually can't marry each other. They can't marry definite mamzerim. They can't marry anybody, basically. Okay, they're stuck, seems like. So he thinks that they can't marry even sfekot. Okay, suffix can't marry suffix. Now, what's the obvious reason? Because let's say you have someone who's just shtuki. We don't know who the father is. Could be the father's disqualified. It could be he's not. So let's say we have two people in exactly the same situation, but they're not exactly the same situation because we don't know what the truth is. One could actually be totally legitimate and one could be totally illegitimate. And then if we allow them to marry each other, you can have a legitimate marrying an illegitimate. Now, you can see why people would disagree with this because then those people will never marry. But you could also see the logic of saying they can't marry each other. So now, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav halacha ke Rabbi Eliezer. Rav paskins like Rabbi Eliezer that these sfekot can't marry each other. Now, but Rabbi Yehuda quotes it in the name of Rav. You might remember Rabbi Yehuda. We've talked about him a lot. He was a student of Rav, and when Rav died, he went to learn Shmuel, and we have this type of statement seen many times. Ki amarita kamei de Shmuel. When I said to this, Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, now, when I told Shmuel what Rav said, Amarli, he said to me, what kind of craziness? Hillel shoneh. Hillel taught in a Braita, or perhaps he's quoting our Mishnah. There's a debate about whether it's a quote from our original Mishnah of the first one in the chapter, or it's maybe a quote from a Braita which just says it much more clearly. Asara yochsin alumi Bavel v'kula mutarim lavos bezeh. There were 10 types of people that came from Babylonia and right to Eretz Israel, and they're all permitted to marry each other. Now, first of all, this isn't true. Of course, they can't all marry each other. He brought mamzerim and he brought kosher people. Doesn't mean that. What it means is all the disqualified people are permitted to each other. The shtuki, the asufi, the cuti, right? All those can marry each other. So how could you possibly say something that goes against this clearly explicit either Mishnah, our Mishnah, which definitely indicated that way, and the Braita, the Hillel taught? What kind of craziness? How could you possibly? So that's this machlok Rav and Shmuel. Do we hold like Rabbi Eliezer and do we limit this? A suffix can't marry a suffix, or do we say it's okay? Okay, and also a suffix can't marry a vadai. Shtuki can't marry a mamzer because the mamzer is a mamzer and the shtuki might not be a mamzer, 50-50 chance. So now they're going to point out a contradiction. And then for this next section, we're going to have to figure out how to resolve this contradiction. We're going to have two basic approaches. Rav and Shmuel totally contradict themselves in a statement that they made where they each seem to say the opposite. I say seem to say because you'll see it's not they exactly say it, but they seem to say. De'itmar, as it was said. Now our case is a woman who's not married, right? She has a child. The child's a shtuki, okay? And that shtuki can't marry a mamzer. So according to Rav and according to Shmuel, can't marry a mamzer because it's all in the psul category. When you have an arusa shibra, which is very similar, a pregnant woman who is a woman who's betrothed who becomes pregnant while she was betrothed and not married, where again we don't say chances are it was her husband because she wasn't married, right? Normally we say if she's married, we assume the husband's the father, but not if they were betrothed. Rav Amar Havlad Mamzer, Shmuel Amar Havlad Shtuki. Now, Rav calls the child a mamzer, and Shmuel calls the child a shtuki. So the question is, what did each of them mean by this? So the first understanding of the Gemara is to assume that Rav Amar Havlad Mamzer, when Rav said mamzer, what he meant to say is the vlad can marry a mamzer. Okay, umutar b'mamzeret. So since this child is unknown who the father is, and we can assume she probably slept with someone who was forbidden to her, so that child is probably illegitimate. We can have them marry a mamzer, a mamzeret. And Shmuel said the vlad is a shtuki. Now, shtuki means we're not sure. So what could he possibly be telling us, the vlad shtuki, against Rav? Well, if Rav said the vlad's a mamzer, meaning it can marry a mamzer, then when Shmuel says the vlad's a shtuki, he must be trying to say asur b'mamzeret, because it's one's safek and one's vadai. Now that matches Rabbi Eliezer. So each one flips entirely of what they said. But again, this is only the way the Gemara understood them, because it wasn't clear. Rav wasn't clear when he said the vlad's a mamzer what he meant, and Shmuel wasn't clear when he said the vlad's a shtuki. So we'll get back to it. But right now they're assuming vlad mamzer means can marry a mamzer. Vlad shtuki means, well, because we're not sure, can't even marry a mamzer. And then they're totally opposite of what they said by us. So again, if you use the sheet, you can follow things on the chart. So now we say the following. Sorry, I skipped a line. Okay. Ipuch. The Gemara says, oh, very simple. You got mixed up with who said what? Switch it. The Rav Amar Havlad Shtuki and can't marry a mamzer. And Shmuel says the Vlad's a mamzer and can't marry a mamzer. I'm sorry, he's a mamzer and can't marry a mamzer because, again, we view the child, even though it's a safek, as if, right, safek and vadai can marry each other. And then it works perfectly. We just switch who says what. Often we say that's the kind of mistake that could happen. But now that, right, first we said, wait, they contradict. How could they say opposite things? Now that they're saying the exact same thing that they said by us, well, now the big question becomes, tarte lamali. What do you need both for? If you said that they have this machloket by a pregnant woman, right, a random pregnant woman, and, you know, can in a sufi or a shtuki or whatever marry a mamzer, and they have the same machloket here by this pregnant woman what's the status of the child? Well, it's the exact same thing. Why do you need it in both places? So now we're going to say it's shricha. Why? We actually need it in both cases. And here, even though you're on the first chart of the first side of the study guide in this bottom chart, but now we're going to flip to, because there we're going to continue. Okay, now we're going to flip to the second side of the chart. Okay, the second side of the page, which has, according to the first answer, which is what we're in, we're now going to say, why do we need the machloket in each case? Okay, and there's a little chart to show you that. So now we have a tzrifa, because why do you need it? De'i itmar baha, if you had it in our case that we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, right, versus we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, right, any safek can marry anyone, which generally we're speaking of a child that even the mother wasn't even betrothed at all. You could claim, and this goes back to things we said yesterday, that's where Rav said it, because she's just a random woman who wasn't married. Most chances are, right, most people in the world are actually permitted to her. And you could say that's why Rav said, again, this isn't like 50, safek is 50-50, she's a mamzer or she's kosher. No, or the vlad, right, male or female. It's more the issue of chances are, it's like 90% that the kid's a kosher vlad, which means that we're not going to let that kid be with a mamzer, according to Rav, because, right, that this is most likely a kosher child. So then we're not going to allow it. Aval hatam, you might have thought it's a numbers game, a percentage game. Hatam, but when she's betrothed, you might have thought, and this is why Rav had to say, I still think she can't marry mamzer, because you might have thought there, in that case, once she's betrothed, everyone in the world, 99.9% of the men in the world are forbidden to her. So maybe Rav would have said, yeah, chances are the kid's a mamzer because she's a betrothed woman, which means she's an eshadish, which means she has any relationship with anyone else, the kid's going to be a mamzer. Maybe that kind of kid, when she's pregnant, when she's already betrothed when she got pregnant, then we can assume that since most of the people that are disqualified, chances are it's a mamzer and allow her to be with a mamzer. And that's why Rav had to say, no. I still disagree with Shmuel in that case. I don't think in any of these cases they can marry a mamzer. Now let's go the reverse. And now we're going to bring the total opposite logic, which you might have thought of on your own yesterday. If you had it in the case of the woman who was betrothed already, then you would say, Bahaka Amarav, there Rav says you can't marry a mamzer. Now, until now we said, well, what do you mean? 99.9% of the men in the world are forbidden to her. So all the more so she should be, the child should be able to marry a mamzer. But no, Mishum de'ika lemitla ba'arus, but she's betrothed to someone. A random, right, a woman who's unmarried, we have no clue which man in the world she was with. But a woman who was betrothed, even though we don't say, right, she hasn't yet had sexual relations with him, but chances are if she's going to have a relationship with anybody, it's probably going to be with the person she's betrothed to. That would make a lot of sense. So maybe that's why Rav said there, chances are the child's not a mamzer. It's probably the one she was permitted to, even though 99.9% of the men in the world are forbidden to her, but it doesn't matter because those 99.9% of the men are irrelevant to her. This guy is the one she already decided she's going to marry. Probably it was with him. But in the case where we just have a random woman who's pregnant, maybe there's a good chance that she was impregnated by someone who is pasul. You might say also, what men are likely to sleep around with women who are single, not through marriage? Maybe the man who can't get married. It's possible. I mean, again, you could apply all sorts of logic. So maybe Rav would agree with Shmuel that chances are it's a mamzer and therefore can marry a mamzer, but no, it's true. That's why Rav had to say, I disagree in both cases. That's why they had to bring the machlok. Okay. That was all to say ipuch. And that Rav and Shmuel are talking about the exact same thing in both cases. They contradict, so just switch who says what. Now we're going to suggest something else. Don't flip the shita. My mamzer to kama Rav. When Rav said the Vlad's a mamzer, he didn't mean mutar b'mamzeret. That's not what he meant, and therefore can marry a mamzer. That was what he was saying. No, you misunderstood. Ela de asur b'bat Yisrael. You have this suffix. Well, we know the suffix can't marry a regular Jewish person. That's what Rav was saying. You have this child born from this woman. We don't know who the father is. Well, can't marry a Jewish girl, a regular, kohen levi v'Yisraeli. Shmuel amar havlad shtuki to asur b'bat Yisrael. And Shmuel says we call the vlad a shtuki, and it's forbidden to bat Yisrael. Okay, this makes no sense. Then they're not arguing. So the Gemara is going to say, Ihachi hanu derav. Well, then they're both saying the same thing. You're saying that they're both concluding that the whole point is can't marry a Jewish woman, right, who doesn't have any problem of unflawed lineage. Well, that's obvious, right? And there's no machloket then. Why is one calling it a mamzer and can't marry and one's calling it a shtuki? That makes no sense. So that is a bad answer. So let's try again. But we're going to keep within this. We're going to have 4 possible explanations within this of what Shmuel meant when he said the Vlad is a shtuki. Rav, we're going to stick with. The Vlad is a mamzer, meaning, well, it's really only a shtuki. It's safek. But because it's safek, he can't marry bat Yisrael. Now we're going to have to explain what did Shmuel mean when Shmuel said, oh, don't call him a mamzer, call the Vlad a shtuki. Elamai shtuki, shemishatkino tomidin kuhuna. If he claims his father was a kohen and he wants to work in the temple, we don't let him because we don't know who the father is for sure. So the Gemara says, that's a ridiculous assumption that that's what Shmuel said because it's so obvious. Pshita, Hashemidin Yisrael mishatkin. If we don't allow him to marry any woman of kohen levi Yisraeli, right? Kohen levi Yisraeli, midin kuname by what you think there was even a thought that he could work in the temple? Of course he can't work in the temple. We have no idea who his father is. Okay. Third option. Elamai shtuki, shemishatkino tomi nechseavi. We don't let him try to claim that his father is so-and-so, and I want to get the inheritance. To which the Gemara says, that's also a ridiculous assumption. Pshita, mi yadina avu amani. Of course he can't claim rights to land. What do we know? You want to get money out of someone? You have to prove it. He has no proof who his father is. So of course he can't claim money, but no. The case is where he already took land, that he claimed, he's my father, took land already from his inheritance, and now we want to remove it from his property and say, you have no proof. Normally, the burden of proof is on the person who's trying to take the money away from him, right? Now, nobody really has proof who his father is, but comes Shmuel to say the Vlad is a shtuki, meaning there's really no idea who his father is, and therefore you can actually remove the money from his possession if he grabbed it. So that in the end is option number 3, which is a possibility. And option number 4, which Shmuel was trying to say is, well, it's true that we say the Vlad can't marry a Jewish woman, but we do, right, a regular, but we do believe the mother. If the mother said who the father is, she's believed. And that's why we call it a shtuki. This is like Abba Shaul, shtuki is beduki. That's why Shmuel said, no, the Vlad's a shtuki, meaning we can believe the mother. And that's what he was trying to say. To which the Gemara asked, but what? Same question we asked yesterday. Kiman Rabban Gamliel? If he's just holding like Rabban Gamliel in Ketubot that we believe the mother, he already said this. Now, where do we know this? Because it's not. It says in the Mishna we quoted yesterday. If she was pregnant, said, who's the baby? And she says, Mi'ish Ploni v'Kohen, right? He's a perfectly good lineage. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, Omrim Ne'amenet, Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Ein Ne'amenet. He actually said a different wording, Lo Mi Pianu Chayim, but basically one believes, one doesn't. Now, I'm Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, halachak Rabban Gamliel. Shmuel already said I paskin like Rabban Gamliel, that we believe the mother. So why would he need to say it here? And again, we're going to go through the same stricha we saw yesterday. There, she was single. So most people are ksherim, and therefore, right, but here she was betrothed. Maybe we go by the 99.9% of the people who are forbidden to her. Tzricha. That's why Shmuel had to say no. We still believe the mother. Okay, Tanya. Now we're getting to the third sugya of today. So the second sugya, again, to review, was Hakol Modim Ba'amanat, right? I'm sorry, the Vadai, this whole opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that Vadai Sapek Vadai can't marry. Okay, and then we saw Rav and Shmuel, one paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, Shmuel paskin not like Rabbi Eliezer. They actually, all the Sveiko can marry each other. And then we said there seems to contradict what they say somewhere else. And then we resolved contradiction in two different ways. The second way, we had two different explanations that actually weren't knocked down. Okay, now we're going to get to a bright of Rabbi Elazar Omer cuti lo isa cuti. And Rabbi Elazar further says, this is why some people say our Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar and not Rabbi Eliezer. Seems to be a continuation of our Mishnah. Also, a cuti can't marry a cuti. Now, it's going to be a little complicated. We're going to have to figure out why this is. My timer. I'm Rabbi Yosef. Asewa keger la'achar asara dorot. Rabbi Yosef says a cuti, right? They were many years ago, they converted. So they're like a convert who's after 10 generations. What do we know about this? Well, the Tanya, ger asara dorot mutar b'mamzeret. According to the one who says, we hold like a ger can marry a mamzeret, because they're not really considered part of the kahal, that's only for 10 generations. After 10 generations, they can't. What's the issue? Okay, we'll see in a minute. Some people think it's just until nobody really knows that they came from a Gentile background. So whether it's, this particular convert, how many generations does it take till people forget that he was a convert? That his parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents, etc., were converts, or we just give it a blanket number, 10 generations. We assume after 10 generations, nobody knows anymore they were converts, and therefore what? They can't marry a mamzeret, because if we allow them to marry a mamzeret, even though technically, halachically, they can, because they come from a family of converts, it doesn't matter, because people will see this Jew, who they think was a born Jew, right? I'm sure we all know converts, and we have no idea that they're converts, or we know people whose parents converted. We have no idea their parents converted. At a certain point, nobody knows anymore. So once they don't know, we're going to see this person marry a mamzeret, people are going to think, oh, a Jew can marry a mamzeret. So at a certain point, we don't allow this anymore. So therefore, what's he saying, basically? Well, a cuti, lo isa cuti, because one might be from many generations, and one, right? The kutim in general were from many generations ago. They converted, so they're like this convert that converted many years ago and can't marry a mamzeret. But it doesn't make any sense, because all the kutim converted at the same time. It's not like we have a kuti who converted this year and we have a kuti who converted, 35 generations ago. That's not what we're talking about here. So Abai says this makes no sense what you're saying. I'm like, Abai midame. These are not similar at all. Hatam, and the ger not marrying a mamzeret after 10 generations is a ger yashan. It's an old-time ger convert, and a mamzeret chadasha, and someone who's newly psula, a clear mamzeret. And here, right, Amrei bar Yisraelu de kanasiv mamzeret. People will say the Jew married a mamzeret, but but here they converted so long ago that basically we're assuming, right, they're all kutim are at the same stage. It's not like one's a kuti, one's a mamzeret in the eyes of the people. So they reject that option. Rav Dimi said the following. Rabbi Elazar savar like Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Yishmael savar like Rabbi Akiva. Okay, we're going to have to see in a minute what this is. We're now on Amabet. Rabbi Elazar savar like Rabbi Yeshua. We're going to say basically Rabbi Elazar held like Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua held like Rabbi Akiva on some others. So what is this? Dama. Kutim gerei arayot. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael held, we're going to see that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree. Are kutim real Jews or are they not real Jews? Were they legit converts or not legit converts? So Rabbi Yishmael says they were not legit converts. They converted because they were scared. It's not a convert. If you convert because you're scared to get killed, well, right, that's not a convert. So they were scared because they weren't keeping the laws of the land. They brought a kohen to teach them the laws of the land. They started keeping the laws of the land and called themselves Jews, but they're really not. And Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva Da'amal, Ovek Kochavim be'eved Abba Bat Yisrael Havlav Mamzer. Now we're going to see later that these kutim, according to some interpretations, married into Kohanim families. Okay, first of all, the Kohen came and taught them, and then this is pasuk we're going to read in a bit, which says they were fearing God. This is in Sefer Melachim Bet Perek Yud Zayin. They made from, we're not exactly sure what mikzotam is. It sounds like some of them. Kohanei Bamot. They made some people to be the kohanim of their altars that they made. And then they would sacrifice. What they're going to learn here is that they married into the Kohen families. Okay, there was intermarriage here. Now, what's the intermarriage here? Well, some of the kutim, because they were living among Jews now, because some of the Jews came there to teach them, and they ended up, according to this tradition, they married into Kohanim. Well, what happened? If they marry a Kohen, what happens? Okay, let's say a male cuti marries a female Jew. So what's going to happen? Well, according to Rabbi Akiva, you might remember this, we've seen this many, many times. The child is a mamzer. So now some of the kutim are Jewish mamzerim because their mother is a Jew, which means the child's a Jew, but she had a relationship with a Gentile, which means the child's a mamzer. Some of them are Jewish mamzerim. Others, gerei arayot, are not Jews at all. So now what's the issue? A cuti lo yisa cuti, because it's intermarriage. Okay? The Jews can't marry Gentiles. So that's the reason, according to this. And you would have to say again that Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Ishmael on the issue of gerei arayot, and Rabbi Ishmael holds like Rabbi Akiva on the issue of Gentile-Jewish relationship, child is a mamzer. Okay, because if the child's not a mamzer, then there's no problem. Because, right, you would have to have, what they want to say is, even though the child's a mamzer, because the child's a mamzer can't marry, even though it's a mamzer, right? One kuti might be a mamzer and one might be a Gentile. And that's the problem. So now they say, wait a minute. Rabbi Ishmael Rabbi Akiva. First of all, we said he holds like Rabbi Ishmael. Who holds like Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Ishmael definitely doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva on this issue of the mamzer. How do we know? Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, if a Gentile or an Eved has a relationship with a Jewish woman, okay, let's say she's a bat kohen, she can no longer eat truma. Let's say she's a Leviah. If she gets married to a kohen, she can't eat truma. Okay, by having had this relationship with a Gentile before, disqualifies her from eating truma. How do we know this? Shenemar ubat kohen. Now we talk about a bat kohen when she goes back after her marriage is over. Kitia almana gushav. She becomes a widow or a divorcee. V'zera einlan. She has no children. She can go back to her father's house and eat truma. What do they learn from here? Mishayesh lo amanu v'gerushin. We've seen this also a bunch of times. Someone who there is an option for widowing or divorce, which would exclude yatsa eved kochavim be'eved she'ein lo amanu v'gerushin. Now, if a Gentile marries a Jewish woman, there's no Kiddushin. That's not considered marriage by Jewish law. If they get divorced, it's not considered divorced by Jewish law. There is no en Kiddushin tofsim, as we learn. V'is savar Rabbi Akiva hashemam zehava mifsal v'biato mebaya. If he holds like Rabbi Akiva, the child's a mamzer, you wouldn't even need to start talking about, they can't eat truma. Of course they can't eat truma. If the child becomes a mamzer, then of course this woman who had this relationship with the Gentile, of course she can't eat truma. It's way, that's like a much higher level to allow someone to eat truma. So it doesn't make sense based on the fact that he said this, that he thinks that the child would be a mamzer. So it can't be, what do we say? Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Ishmael, and Rabbi Ishmael holds like Rabbi Akiva. So now we could say, let's try simpler. Rabbi Eliezer sever like Rabbi Ishmael damar cuti gerei arayot, v'sever like Rabbi Akiva damar evok kochavim be'eved abal ba'Yisrael Israel avlav mamzer. We could just simply say that Rabbi Eliezer held like Rabbi Ishmael on this issue and held like Rabbi Akiva on this. Not that Rabbi Ishmael had to have held like Rabbi Akiva, but what Rabbi Eliezer did when he got to the conclusion that cuti lo yisa cuti was because he held by these two opinions, independent of what Rabbi Ishmael holds. He holds like Rabbi Ishmael on one issue and Rabbi Akiva on the others. Well, that's also not going to work. He definitely doesn't hold that Israel, the child of mamzer, like Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Eliezer, he said, they had this whole debate about tzara, whether the tzara of a woman who falls to Yibam, right, the rival wife of the woman, the first Mishna in Yevamot, who falls to a man in Yibam, if the woman was let's say the daughter of the person she falls to Yibam with, then the tzara is exempt from Yibam. Well, Rabbi Elazar says that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel have a debate about whether really the tzara is exempt or not. But Modim, and that part wasn't really important, but this is the important part. Modim, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, according to Rabbi Elazar, who we're discussing here, Modim she'ein mamzer ela mimishi isuro isur v'avanush karet. Well, there he says it explicitly. You're not a mamzer if it's just an isur lav, which is the ovei kochavim in the Ba'Yisrael Israel. So he doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva that the Vlad's a mamzer. So you can't say that Rabbi Elazar holds like Rabbi Shmuel on that issue, and Rabbi Akiva on the mamzer. Therefore, we're now going to come to the real understanding of, or at least we have three possible understandings now, only see two of them in this daf, one in the next daf, and then we're going to actually see a bit more. But Kiata Rabin, when Rabin came from Israel, he said in the name of Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, or some people say Amar Rabbi Abba, bar Zabda, Amar Rabbi Chanina, and some people say Amar Rabbi Akiva, bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi. We have three possibilities as to who said this. What did they say? Shalosh machlokot b'davar. There's three basic approaches to saying why Rabbi Eliezer said a cuti can marry a cuti. So Rabbi Ishmael Savar, we're going to start with the first. Rabbi Ishmael holds kutim gerei rayotin, and this goes back to what I mentioned before. V'kohanim shenitmu'u behem kohanim psulim hayu. We tried to get to the mamzer issue before by saying a Jewish and a non-Jewish person who get together creates a mamzer. That was Rabbi Akiva, but we proved no one can say it. So we're going to come up with mamzerim, being that some of the kutim are mamzerim in a different way. What are we going to say? The kohanim that were believed to have to intermarry them were actually kohanim psulim. They were kohanim who were mamzerim. So the kutim married the daughters of kohanim who were mamzerim. As the kohanim that they intermarried with were specifically messed up lineage. Now, how do we get to that they were bad lineage? Well, mina kotsim shaba'am, from the thorns in the nation, meaning the bad kohanim they married. And that's why a kuti can marry a kuti, because some of them were intermarried with kohanim or mamzerim, which means that the mother was a Jewish woman, the child's a Jew, and a mamzer, because the mother was a mamzer. So because they came from flawed lineage. So basically what it's saying is historically, there was intermarriage with kutim and mamzerim b'no kohanim. Now, it doesn't really matter, they were b'no kohanim. That's just what the pasuk says, that they intermarried with kohanim. Say the kohanim were psulim. Then basically we say now some of the kutim are just regular non-Jews, and some of them are mamzerim, and a mamzer is still Jewish, can't marry a kuti. So basically, since we don't know which kuti is which, because we didn't keep good lineage, no kuti can marry a kuti for that reason, because it's intermarriage. Rabbi Akiva Savar, so now we're going to see number two, and then we're going to end for today. Kutim gerei metim, the legitimate fair and square converts. He thought they converted for good reasons, and they're really sincere. Kohanim shenitmu b'hem kohanim ksherim hayu, and because, right, this goes hand in hand. If they were good converts, they probably only married people with good lineage, which means there's really no problem. Okay, so now we're going to have to figure out. It means they're Jewish. They can marry, right? They married Jews. What's the problem then? Right? And now, first of all, how does he get they were ksherim? Because he understands the pasuk differently. Before we said miksotam like kutsi, he says Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He has a different interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan than Rabbi Yochanan. Mina bechirim shabam. Katzeh is on the edge. Now on the edge could be the worst. On the edge could be the best. They married the best of the best. Ela. So then why can't a kuti marry a kuti? They should be fair and square Jews with good lineage. What's the issue? Well, there was one issue, and the kutim in general are known to keep the Torah Shabbat sometimes very literally. We're not going to see this today. We'll see this tomorrow's daf, how they got to this. But what would they do? Hayumi yabmim ta'aruso. They would do yibum on women who are betrothed, which we do also. That's legit. You're supposed to do yibum, even if you're just betrothed and your husband dies. But potreim et nisuot. They would say, if you were married already to your husband and he died without children, you don't have to do yibum. Okay, why and where they got to this from the psukim, you'll see in tomorrow's daf. But the main thing is that because they didn't do yibum with married women, they ended up with problematic lineage, right? So in general, they were good Jews, but they messed up this one halacha, which meant that all their lineage is messed up. And therefore, again, you could be from a messed up lineage if they were supposed to do yibum and they didn't, or you could be from a good lineage, which is why one can't marry the other. In the next stop, they'll explain why this is, and then we'll get to also what's the third opinion about what the three machlokot b'davar, three different explanations of why kuti lo yisak kuti. Okay, that's it for today. A bit of a complicated daf, a bit long, but wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and hopefully more peace in Israel.